while Canon customers eagerly await the announcement of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1, Nikon customers are getting ready for the announcement of the Nikon Z6 Mark III, with some very powerful features that punch well above its belt. And this all goes back to January of this year, where Nikon Rumors gave us a rather solid list of supposed leaked specifications of the Nikon Z6 Mark III that said it was supposed to come out in the first quarter of 2024. And well, the first quarter is essentially over now with just about a week left. So I'm willing to believe, and I've kind of got the sense that we're going to get a lot of major announcements in the first half of 2024. And Nikon Rumors might have gotten the quarter wrong, but I don't think they're far off. I think that in the second half, or the first half of this year, in the second quarter, that's where we're going to see the announcement of the Nikon Z6 Mark III. So the Nikon Z6 Mark III, the Canon EOS R5. I think this is shaping up to be an interesting battle. And why am I talking about the R5 and the Z6 Mark III? Well, some of the specifications, so let's get to them right now. Now, as far as the sensor, as Nikon Rumors had reported back in January, it's going to have a new sensor, a new 24.5 backside illuminated sensor. So not a lot of details there. We don't know how great this is, but it's using a backside illuminated. It's not using a stack sensor. It's not using a dual gain stack sensor or anything like that. And they're probably not using anything from Red because, well, that deal has just kind of solidified, so they wouldn't have enough time to borrow any of the technology from Red. But this is where it gets rather interesting. Like the Nikon Z8 and the Nikon Z9, the Nikon Z6 Mark III is supposed to be able to shoot up to 120 frames per second. I'm willing to bet that that is JPEG, and it's probably around 11 frames per second, 11 megapixels. We see the same thing in the Nikon Z8 and the Z9. It drops the resolution down to 11 megapixels, but still, that's pretty impressive. I don't know about the Canon EOS R5 or the R1. We don't have any leaked specifications indicating what their frame rate's going to be, but yeah, the Nikon Z6 Mark III. But this is where it gets rather interesting. The Nikon Z9 can shoot at 20 frames per second lossless RAW. So can the Nikon Z8. That's a huge amount of bandwidth. We're talking about 1.2 gigabytes per second, and that's easily taken care of with a CF Express Type B card, and the Nikon Z6 Mark III is supposed to have a CF Express Type B, as well as a UHS 2 card, so dual card slots. But it's also going to take that same 20 frames per second lossless RAW that you see in the Z8 and the Z9 and have it in the Z6 Mark III. Okay, you're probably doing the same thing I'm doing. You're thinking about their lineup. Well, does this mean we're going to have a Nikon Z7? We're seeing the Z8 was basically a mini Z9, although the Z9 does have, well, it's the best of the best when it comes to performance and buffer and all that stuff, but essentially the Z8 is a mini Z9. So is the Z6 Mark III a mini Z8? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the video specifications to help you there. The Nikon Z6 Mark III will be capable of shooting up to 6K, 24, 25, 30, 50, and 60 frames per second. Now in 4K, this is pretty impressive. It's going to be able to shoot up to 120 frames per second. At the price point of the Nikon Z6, this is rather impressive. Previously, you had to spend all the way up to a Nikon Z8, a Canon EOS R5, just shy of $4,000 to get 4K, 120 frames per second. But if we drop down to 4K 60, we're able to get Apple ProRes RAW. That's right, Apple ProRes RAW, also Nikon RAW, at 4K 60 frames per second. So 50, 60, as well as the basic frame rates of 24, 25, and 30. Now at 4K 120 frames per second, it is cropped, and at 4K 60, it's full sensor readout, so you're getting essentially 6K oversampled 4K. Wow, the Nikon Z6 Mark III is looking like a pretty solid camera. And if you're on the Canon side of things, looking at the R8, you might want to take a look at the Nikon Z6 Mark III. At least from a video point of view, these specifications are looking very, very solid. Oh, and in 1080, if we can believe these leaked specifications, it's supposed to be able to shoot up to 120 frames per second, although some rumors are saying as high as 240 frames per second. But I think that's a bit too aggressive. Again, these are coming from multiple sources. All right, now one other thing let's go back to the still side of things. A lot of people like having a mechanical and electronic shutter. And yes, the Nikon Z6 Mark III will have both a mechanical and electronic, not just electronic. And in terms of the sync speed, 1/16,000th of a second. So that's pretty good, pretty impressive there as well. But there is one other capability that the Nikon Z6 Mark III is getting that many of the big boys have, and that's pixel shift. Hopefully Nikon's implementation of pixel shift will be able to take into account moving subjects or objects, which the A7R5 can do very, very well, but the Canon EOS R5, well, it can't do in any way whatsoever. It will get a new variable angle LCD, so an improvement over the Mark II, and the EVF at 5.76 million dots. That's an improvement over the Nikon Z6 Mark II, the Nikon Z8, and the Nikon Z9, which has a resolution of 3.69 million dots. And of course, it's going to have 8 stops of IBIS, or VR as Nikon calls it. So the Nikon Z6 Mark III is shaping up to be a pretty impressive camera. Sure, some people might say that 1/16th of a second sync time compared to, well, the global shutter A9 Mark III isn't that impressive, but it's pretty solid, electronic, mechanical. But 20 frames per second lossless RAW and 6K 60 frames per second, or Apple ProRes RAW at 4K 60, that's pretty impressive. I'm pretty excited by this camera. I'm curious to see what the price will be, because that will really, if they bring this right around the same price as the Nikon Z6 Mark II, you know what, this is looking like a very, very solid update to Nikon's lineup. And with the Z8 and the Z9, the ZF, wow, this, and of course their acquisition of Red. I mean, Nikon is looking like they're on fire. So when are we getting it? Well, the previous post that we got from Nikon Rumors back in January said Q1. And of course, that's January, February, March. And it's March the 24th, I think. It's hard to read because I don't have my glasses on. So we've got a week left. And I don't think anything's happening this coming week. So when could we get it? Well, I think April makes an awful lot of sense, April or May. And then we kind of take a bit of a break for the summer months and then hit back in September, October. So I really think we're going to get an announcement, most likely in the first half of April. If Canon is going to be coming out, I would imagine that Nikon would probably want to try to miss the same week or the same day as Canon. We don't know what day Canon is coming out with their announcement. It's supposed to be a big enough of an announcement that they'll probably schedule something at least a week ahead of time, although they could surprise us. So the Nikon Z6 Mark III, we're expecting it sometime in April, although it could happen in May as well. I don't expect them to push this off until the second half, and we'll just have to wait and see what the price is. But if you're interested in picking up the Nikon Z6 Mark II for $1,596.95, saving you $400 off, and I do have the link in the description down below. And a big thanks to everybody that has used my affiliate links in the past. These ones right here, I do have them in the description down below. It really does help this channel grow. It's what's enabled me to get to where I am today with this channel. So a big thank you to all of you that have used my affiliate links. And if you haven't, well, it doesn't cost you anything. If you're looking at buying from Adorama, B&H, or Amazon.com, just use the affiliate links in the description, because it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to jump through hoops. In fact, there's no difference than if you were to go to these websites yourself. And most importantly, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest, I highly recommend subscribing and choosing all notifications. You can also follow me on X, because if we get minor updates, well, I'll put them out on X first. So happy Sunday. I hope you like this information. If you're a Canon customer, or a Panasonic or Sony customer, what do you think about these Nikon Z6 Mark III specifications? Some people might not like 24.5 megapixels, even though it's backside illuminated. It has to be global shutter or stacked. But for the price point, and even for me today, you know what? 24 megapixels is more than enough. I think for a lot of people that are hobbyists, and even some pros, I mean, look at the A9 Mark III. With that global shutter, it's 24 megapixels. I don't think 24 megapixels is a bad thing. And yes, I shoot with a camera with 45 megapixels. But you know what? If it was less, I wouldn't feel that bad. The only reason this is so high up in megapixels is because it's doing 8K video as well. And that gives me extra crisp 4K video because it's full sensor down to 4K. But to get 6K oversample 4K, 4K 60 in Apple ProRes RAW, or 4K 120 cropped, I don't know. The Nikon Z6 Mark III is looking like a pretty impressive camera. And if you're not a Nikon customer, you got to look at this and say, you know what, if the price is right, this looks very appealing. Let me know what you think about the specs for this Nikon Z6 Mark III in the comment section down below, and let me know if you're interested in purchasing this camera if you are already a Nikon customer, or if you are using a Sony, a Canon, or Panasonic, if you're interested in getting the Nikon Z6 Mark III. Anyhow, that's it for now. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.